It was early 2021, just another day for a fitness instructor who set up her camera for a routine workout session. What she didn't realize was that her movements were about to coincide with something much larger, something far more dangerous. In the background of her video, an unassuming scene unfolded: a military convoy, silently rolling toward Myanmar's parliament. The sight was unnoticed by her at the time, but this fleeting moment, captured on her camera, would later become the only known footage of a significant historical event, the beginning of a devastating coup. This moment, as trivial as it may have seemed to her, marked the start of a devastating war in Myanmar. It was the spark of a crisis, one that would unfold into a catastrophe, changing the lives of millions and reshaping the political landscape of the nation. 4 years later, Myanmar's situation has worsened beyond recognition. What started with a coup has evolved into an endless cycle of violence and suffering. In those early moments, few could have predicted how quickly things would spiral out of control. The coup was swift, brutal, and decisive. Myanmar's fragile democracy crumbled under the weight of the military's iron fist. The government was overthrown, the parliament seized, and a new, authoritarian regime took power. From that point, there was no turning back. The nation plunged into chaos, with violence spreading like wildfire across the land. The war in Myanmar has claimed at least 82,000 lives, and the number continues to grow. More than 3.2 million people have been displaced, forced to flee their homes in search of safety. The central government, once the seat of power, now controls just a small fraction of the country, barely a fifth of its vast territory. The rest of the land has become a patchwork of conflict, with no central authority to guide or protect the people. Myanmar has descended into lawlessness, where various factions vie for control, and survival is a daily struggle. It's a heartbreaking sight. Ethnic groups, each with their own history, culture, and grievances, are locked in battle with one another. In many areas, the fighting is so intense that the national currency has become irrelevant. People no longer rely on money to conduct business. Instead, they trade in weapons, food, and whatever else they can use to survive. Entire regions have become so isolated and fractured that it is almost as though Myanmar no longer exists as a unified country. The social fabric has torn apart, and the effects are felt by every corner of society. The war has also transformed Myanmar into a hotbed for illicit activities. With the government unable to exert control over large parts of the country, criminal enterprises have flourished. Narcotics production, human trafficking, and weapons smuggling have become commonplace, feeding the war machine and keeping the violence alive. These illegal trades have not only caused immense suffering within Myanmar but have also spread their influence to neighboring countries, making Myanmar a regional problem that extends far beyond its borders. At the same time, the coup has turned Myanmar into a proxy battleground, with foreign powers quietly stepping in to shape the conflict to their own advantage. China, India, Russia, and the United States have all played a role in the war, each seeking to ensure that their interests are protected. For China, Myanmar is strategically vital. The country is China's only direct land route to the Indian Ocean, a key corridor for trade, energy imports, and access to critical resources. Since the coup, China has poured billions of dollars into Myanmar, building oil and gas pipelines, ports, and industrial zones along the southern coast. But China's approach has been anything but straightforward. While it supports the military junta with weapons and resources, it also plays a dangerous game by secretly supplying arms to various rebel factions. This delicate balancing act has allowed China to protect its investments while maintaining a certain level of influence over both sides of the conflict. Despite the ongoing violence, China has managed to avoid direct confrontations with the various armed groups. An unspoken rule has emerged: China's assets, its pipelines, ports, and infrastructure are to be spared from attack, even as the war rages on around them. India, too, has tried to navigate the complexities of Myanmar's conflict. Its primary concern lies in the northeast, where separatist insurgents operate from within Myanmar's borders. These groups, many of whom are anti-Indian, use Myanmar as a safe haven from which they launch attacks against Indian security forces. In response, India has cooperated quietly with Myanmar's military, sharing intelligence and conducting cross-border operations. India's involvement has been less about supporting the rebels and more about securing its own border from insurgents. However, Its lack of strong ties to Myanmar's ethnic militias has made its position more fragile. The United States has taken yet another approach, choosing not to directly engage in the conflict. Instead of supplying arms to insurgent groups, the U.S. has focused on providing non-lethal aid to the exiled civilian government, which has operated outside Myanmar's borders since the coup. The U.S. has also pressured neighboring countries like Thailand to play a more active role in addressing the crisis, though Thailand has been reluctant to take sides, knowing that any instability in Myanmar could easily spill across its borders. Thailand has also been cautious in its dealings with China, aware of Beijing's deep strategic interests in Myanmar. For now, Thailand has chosen to allow Myanmar's opposition groups to operate from its territory without directly challenging the military government. The role of the U.S. in Myanmar remains a subject of much speculation. While Washington has publicly refrained from arming rebel groups, there are signs that it may be providing covert assistance. In particular, the U.S. has invested heavily in building up its intelligence networks in the region. A $248 million consulate in Chiang Mai, Thailand, is currently under construction, and it's widely believed that this facility will serve as a hub for gathering intelligence on the conflict. Additionally, there are rumors that the U.S. is planning to establish a supply base in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, to support rebel groups operating along Myanmar's western border. Whether these claims are true remains unclear, but the U.S. has certainly been deepening its involvement in the conflict in subtle ways. China's position in Myanmar has become more complicated over time. Despite its close ties to Myanmar's military, China has been unwilling to fully commit to one side of the conflict. This careful hedging has allowed Beijing to maintain influence over the situation while avoiding the full consequences of backing a losing side. Yet, the more China becomes entangled in Myanmar's war, the more difficult it will be to preserve this balance. In the coming years, Myanmar's fate may hinge on these competing powers. The military junta, with its ties to China and Russia, may find itself increasingly isolated as the war continues to drag on. Meanwhile, rebel factions, backed by the US and India, could gain ground, but only at the cost of further destabilizing the country. As the violence continues, the international community will have to decide whether it is willing to intervene more forcefully or whether Myanmar's fate will remain in the hands of a few powerful nations. As with conflicting interests, Myanmar's collapse into chaos is far from a sudden event. It's a slow, unfolding tragedy, one that stretches back decades. While the military junta may have struck decisively in early 2021, the roots of the conflict can be traced much further back in history. From the moment Myanmar gained independence in 1948, its political system has been unstable, divided by ethnic tensions, colonial legacies, and a deep mistrust between the military and civilian governments. Despite periods of relative peace and attempts at democracy, Myanmar has never been truly united. The military, which has ruled the country for much of its modern history, has long viewed itself as the protector of the nation, holding the belief that only a strong, centralized government can keep the diverse ethnic groups from tearing the country apart. But this mentality has come at a heavy price. For decades, Myanmar's ethnic minorities such as the Kachin, Karen, and Rakhine have felt oppressed by the central government, their voices ignored, and their grievances left unresolved. These groups have fought for autonomy, seeking to preserve their cultures, languages, and rights in the face of a military that has consistently tried to assimilate them into the broader Myanmar identity. Thai. In the months following the coup, the country has been plunged into further disarray. Various ethnic militias, each with its own vision of what Myanmar should be, have fought fiercely for control of their regions. Some, like the Kachin Independence Army, have fought for full autonomy in Kachin State. Others, like the Arakan Army, have pushed for the establishment of a self-governing Rakhine nation, separate from the rest of Myanmar. The Karen and Karenni, long at odds with the central government, continue their struggle for ethnic homelands in the east. Meanwhile, militias in Chin State, fragmented and divided, vie for control in a desperate fight to form an independent Chinland. It is a country divided, and the lines between friend and foe are often blurred. Rebel groups that initially fought for the same cause, freedom from military oppression, are now at odds with one another. The People's Defense Force (PDF), a group formed by the exiled civilian government to overthrow the military junta, has become one of the most significant forces in the struggle. But while its ideals are based on a vision of a democratic federal Myanmar, the PDF has strained relations with many of the ethnic militias. Their vision of a united Myanmar often conflicts with the aspiration of groups that have spent decades fighting for independence from the central government. For many, the PDF represents the same oppressive system they've been fighting against for decades, only in a different guise. The result is a fragmented battlefield, one where no side is truly united, and where the future of the country is uncertain. Myanmar's people are caught in the middle, torn between different factions, all of whom claim to represent their interests. Yet, despite the competing ideologies and visions for the country, one thing is clear: the suffering of the people has reached unbearable levels. The war has displaced millions, left entire communities shattered, and caused untold human suffering. The numbers tell the story: the dead, the wounded, the displaced, but they fail to capture the sheer devastation of a country unraveling at the seams. Amid the chaos, Myanmar has quietly become a central hub for global criminal activity. The lack of government control has allowed narcotics production to flourish, with Myanmar becoming one of the world's largest producers of methamphetamine. These illegal drugs are sold across Southeast Asia and beyond, fueling the conflict as well as the country's fragile economy. Human trafficking, too, has become a pervasive issue, as desperate people, seeking to escape the war, are trafficked across borders and exploited by criminal organizations. Weapons smuggling has also boomed, as both the central government and rebel factions stockpile arms to continue their battles. With no government able to rein in these criminal enterprises, Myanmar has become a breeding ground for exploitation and violence. The consequences of Myanmar's collapse are felt beyond its borders. As a failed state, Myanmar has become a magnet for outside powers, each seeking to secure their interests in the region. China, with its vast economic investments and strategic ambitions, has a clear interest in Myanmar's future. The country is key to China's Belt and Road Initiative, a vast infrastructure project designed to link China with the Indian Ocean and beyond. Through Myanmar, China gains access to vital shipping routes and energy supplies, bypassing the congested South China Sea. For Beijing, Myanmar represents a key piece in its grand strategy, and its influence over the country has grown exponentially in recent years. Yet China's support for Myanmar's military junta is not without complications. While China provides weapons and financial support to the regime, it also faces backlash from Myanmar's ethnic militias, many of whom have been armed by Chinese-made weapons. This has created a delicate balancing act for China. On one hand, it must support the junta to protect its investments. On the other, it must maintain relations with the rebel groups it has armed, ensuring they do not target Chinese assets. The result is an uneasy détente, one that prevents China from fully committing to any one side in the conflict. India, too, has played a part in Myanmar's war, though its involvement is far more limited. India's main concern lies in its northeastern states, where insurgent groups have long operated across the Myanmar border. These groups are seen as a threat to Indian national security, and Myanmar's instability has allowed them to flourish. In response, India has cooperated with Myanmar's military government, sharing intelligence and carrying out joint operations against separatist insurgents. However, India's support for the junta has been far less overt than China's, and India lacks the deep economic ties that China has built with Myanmar. The United States, on the other hand, has taken a different approach. While Washington has publicly condemned the coup and imposed sanctions on Myanmar's military leaders, it has refrained from directly supporting rebel groups. Instead, the U.S. has focused on providing non-lethal aid to the exiled civilian government and urging other nations to take a more active role in addressing the crisis. While the U.S. has avoided direct military intervention, there are signs that it is quietly providing more covert support to Myanmar's opposition groups. The U.S. has also worked to strengthen its ties with countries in the region, such as Thailand and Bangladesh, which have been impacted by the conflict. As Myanmar continues to fracture, the stakes for foreign powers grow ever higher. Myanmar is strategically located between China and India, two of the world's largest and most powerful nations. The conflict in Myanmar has the potential to spill over into neighboring countries, destabilizing an already volatile region. For China, India, and the US, Myanmar is a proxy battleground where the future of Southeast Asia is at stake. But while foreign powers may jockey for position, it is the people of Myanmar who pay the price. They are the ones left behind in the rubble, their hopes for a peaceful future growing dimmer with each passing day. The violent conflict in Myanmar, though contained within its borders, has far-reaching consequences that extend across Asia and beyond. What began as an internal struggle for power has slowly transformed into a complex geopolitical puzzle. The ongoing war in Myanmar is not only a battle for control over a nation but also a struggle between competing global powers, each seeking to influence the outcome in a way that aligns with their strategic interests. As the violence drags on, the international community's involvement has only deepened, with foreign governments arming different factions, providing covert support, and engaging in a shadow war that plays out across the region. China's interests in Myanmar are clear. As Myanmar's largest neighbor and its most significant foreign partner, China has invested heavily in the country's infrastructure and resources. Through the Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), China has sought to link Myanmar to its vast network of trade routes, facilitating the flow of goods, energy, and resources between China and the Indian Ocean. This access is crucial for China's long-term economic plans, as it helps bypass the increasingly congested waters of the South China Sea. Myanmar's strategic location along the Bay of Bengal is also of vital importance to China, providing a direct route for Chinese goods to reach international markets, while also allowing China to secure critical energy supplies from the Middle East and Africa. But China's involvement in Myanmar has not been one-sided. Despite its strong ties with the military junta, China has also been accused of secretly supplying weapons to various rebel groups, including the United Wa State Army UWSA and the Arakan Army. These groups, which fight against the central government, rely heavily on Chinese-made arms, creating a complicated dynamic for Beijing. While China supports Myanmar's military regime in exchange for strategic access to the country, it must also manage its relationships with these rebel factions, ensuring they do not target Chinese assets. This delicate balancing act has allowed China to maintain influence over both sides of the conflict, but it has also created a volatile situation in which any misstep could lead to a breakdown in relations with one of the warring factions. India, too, has recognized the strategic importance of Myanmar. For India, Myanmar is a crucial buffer zone between its northeastern states and the rest of Southeast Asia. Insurgent groups based in Myanmar have long posed a threat to India's security, and the ongoing conflict has only exacerbated this issue. Myanmar has become a safe haven for these groups, who use the country as a base to launch attacks against Indian security forces. In response, India has worked behind the scenes to strengthen its ties with Myanmar's military leadership. India's cooperation with Myanmar has focused primarily on intelligence sharing and counterinsurgency operations, designed to secure the northeastern frontier and prevent insurgents from using Myanmar as a launchpad for attacks. India has also sought to limit the influence of China in Myanmar, concerned that Beijing's growing presence in the country could eventually undermine India's regional security. However, India's approach has been more cautious than China's, and its involvement in Myanmar has been less overt. While India has provided support to Myanmar's military, it has done so quietly, without the same level of public commitment that China has shown. India's ties with Myanmar's ethnic militias are also weak, and it has struggled to gain leverage over the various rebel groups that operate in the country. The United States, on the other hand, has taken a markedly different approach. While Washington has condemned the military coup and imposed sanctions on Myanmar's junta, it has refrained from directly arming the rebel groups fighting against the regime. Instead, the U.S. has focused on providing humanitarian aid and non-lethal assistance to the exiled civilian government, which operates from abroad. This support has been designed to help the civilian government maintain its legitimacy in the eyes of the international community, even as the military regime consolidates its power on the ground. The U.S. has also sought to pressure other nations in the region, such as Thailand and Bangladesh, to take a more active role in addressing the crisis. Washington has encouraged Thailand to support Myanmar's opposition forces, especially the People's Defense Force (PDF), which has grown in strength over the past few years. However, Thailand has been hesitant to intervene, concerned about the potential for instability to spill over into its own borders. Moreover, Thailand is wary of upsetting its relationship with China, given Beijing's strategic interests in Myanmar. As a result, Thailand has chosen to allow the PDF to operate from its soil without officially endorsing the group. In the background, the US has also been working to strengthen its intelligence networks in the region. A new $248 million consulate, under construction in Chiang Mai, Thailand, is part of this effort. Once completed, the consulate will serve as a hub for gathering information on the ongoing conflict and for supporting Myanmar's opposition groups. The US has also been rumored to be planning a new supply base in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, to assist rebel factions along Myanmar's western border. This would allow the US to provide material support to groups like the Arakan Army and the Chin National Front, both of which have gained ground in recent years. But the US is not the only foreign power that has taken notice of Myanmar's significance. Russia, too, has deep interests in the region. In recent years, Russia has become one of Myanmar's key military partners, supplying the junta with MiG-29 fighter jets and Mi-35 helicopter gunships. These Russian-made weapons have become central to the military's air operations, allowing the government to launch devastating strikes on rebel-controlled towns and villages. While Russia has maintained strong ties with Myanmar's military, its involvement has been complicated by the ongoing war in Ukraine. With its resources stretched thin, Russia's support for Myanmar may be waning, and it isn't clear how much longer it can continue to provide military aid. As Myanmar's conflict continues to draw in foreign powers, the international community remains deeply divided over how to respond. Some countries, like China and Russia, have continued to support the military junta, while others, like the US and India, have backed the opposition. The UN has called for a peaceful resolution to the conflict, but with no clear path forward, Myanmar remains in a state of limbo. The war continues to rage, with no end in sight, and the future of the country hangs in the balance. The stakes are high. Myanmar is not just a failed state, it is a battleground for global influence. The competing interests of China, India, Russia, and the US are playing out on its soil, shaping the course of the conflict and determining the fate of millions of people. The war in Myanmar may be far from over, but the involvement of these external powers will continue to shape the outcome. Whether Myanmar can ever find peace or whether it will remain locked in an endless cycle of violence is something only time will reveal. As Myanmar's internal strife continues to escalate, the country has become a battleground not just for the ethnic groups fighting for independence but also for the regional and global powers vying for influence. The involvement of external forces has transformed the conflict from a national crisis into a complex geopolitical struggle. Each power, with its own interests and motivations, has contributed to the destruction of Myanmar's fragile statehood. The tragedy of Myanmar lies not only in the violence within its borders but also in the way the world's great powers have used it as a stage for their own geopolitical games. China's role in Myanmar is particularly significant. For Beijing, Myanmar is more than just a neighboring country, it is a crucial component of China's broader strategic ambitions. The Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), which aims to create a vast network of trade routes connecting China to Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, has made Myanmar a key piece of the puzzle. The country's strategic location along the Bay of Bengal, offering direct access to the Indian Ocean, makes it a critical link in China's quest for global dominance. The pipelines, highways, and ports that China has built and continues to build in Myanmar are not just economic ventures. They are strategic investments in securing China's long-term interests in the region. Myanmar's military junta, desperate to hold on to power, has welcomed China's investments and military support. Since the coup, China has been one of the regime's most important backers, supplying arms, infrastructure projects, and financial aid. However, China's support comes with its own set of challenges. While the military junta sees China as an ally, many ethnic groups and rebel factions view China with deep suspicion. The Chinese-made weapons that flow into Myanmar's border regions have fueled the insurgencies, and Chinese infrastructure projects in the country have often bypassed the needs of local populations. As a result, China's role in Myanmar has become a delicate balancing act, with Beijing playing both sides of the conflict in an effort to maintain influence over the country. Despite its close relationship with Myanmar's military government, China has been cautious not to provoke the various ethnic militias operating in the country. These groups, including the Kachin, Karen, and Arakan armies, have been armed with Chinese-made weapons, and while China has provided support to the junta, it has refrained from directly interfering in the ethnic struggles. This careful approach has allowed China to maintain its influence over Myanmar's military while also ensuring that its investments, particularly in oil and gas infrastructure, remain protected from attacks. However, China's strategy is far from perfect. The situation in Myanmar is increasingly unstable, and the military junta's hold on power is weakening. As Myanmar's conflict becomes more entrenched, China's investments and infrastructure projects are at risk. While China may continue to support Myanmar's military junta, it is clear that the country is on the brink of collapse, and no one, not even China, can predict how the situation will evolve. India, too, has deep interests in Myanmar, particularly in its northeastern states, which share a border with Myanmar. These regions have long been plagued by insurgencies, with separatist groups using Myanmar as a base for their operations. India has been concerned about the spillover effects of Myanmar's conflict on its own security. As such, India has quietly supported Myanmar's military government, sharing intelligence and conducting joint operations against insurgent groups. India's focus has been on securing its northeastern frontier, where separatist nationalist groups operate, and it has worked behind the scenes to prevent these groups from gaining strength. India's involvement in Myanmar has been more cautious than China's, and it has avoided overt military intervention. Unlike China, which has deeply invested in Myanmar's economy and infrastructure, India's engagement with Myanmar has been more limited. However, India's support for the military junta has not been without controversy. Many ethnic groups in Myanmar, including the Kachin and Karen, have expressed anger at India's cooperation with the regime, viewing it as an endorsement of the junta's brutal crackdown on ethnic minorities. India's support for the Myanmar military has strained relations with these groups, making it more difficult for India to gain leverage over the situation. India's main concern is the insurgent groups operating along the Myanmar-India border. These groups, which oppose the Indian government, have used Myanmar as a safe haven to launch attacks on Indian security forces. In response, India has cooperated with Myanmar's military to counter these insurgencies. In 2025, India launched a drone strike inside Myanmar, targeting separatist commanders who had been operating along the border. India has also shared intelligence with Myanmar's military to combat cross-border insurgencies. But India's relationship with Myanmar's ethnic militias remains tenuous, and it lacks the deep economic ties that China has built with the country. For the United States, Myanmar's crisis presents a moral and strategic dilemma. Washington has condemned the coup and imposed sanctions on Myanmar's military government, but it has stopped short of directly intervening in the conflict. The U.S. has refrained from providing military aid to rebel groups, instead focusing on non-lethal assistance to Myanmar's exiled civilian government. The U.S. has also sought to increase its influence in the region, working with Thailand and other neighboring countries to address the crisis. In recent years, the U.S. has taken a more active role in supporting Myanmar's opposition. A new U.S. consulate, under construction in Chiang Mai, Thailand, is expected to serve as a base for intelligence gathering and support for rebel factions operating from Thai soil. The U.S. has also provided humanitarian aid to the millions of displaced people in Myanmar, as well as non-lethal assistance to the People's Defense Force (PDF), the rebel group formed by the exiled civilian government. However, the U.S. has been careful not to openly commit to any one faction, maintaining a neutral stance in the conflict while quietly supporting the opposition. While the U.S. has avoided direct military intervention, there are indications that it is considering a more active role. Local sources have claimed that the U.S. is contemplating plans to establish a supply base in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, to support insurgent groups along Myanmar's western border. The U.S. may also be planning to impose a no-fly zone over Myanmar's Rakhine state to prevent the Myanmar Air Force from supporting government forces on the ground. These reports, though unconfirmed, suggest that the U.S. is preparing to deepen its involvement in the conflict. Myanmar's importance to the U.S. lies in its geopolitical location, situated between China and India. Both China and India are key U.S. rivals in the region, and Myanmar's position at the crossroads of these two powers makes it a crucial piece in the larger regional puzzle. The US is keen to ensure that Myanmar does not fall fully under China's sphere of influence, and it has been using diplomatic, economic, and covert means to influence the course of the conflict. The competition between China and the US for influence in Myanmar has become a defining feature of the conflict. While China has provided military support to the junta, the US has supported the opposition. Both powers have sought to secure their interests in the country, but the situation remains fluid. Myanmar's future remains uncertain, and the geopolitical stakes continue to rise. As Myanmar's war drags on, the world watches with growing concern, yet the path forward remains unclear. Despite the involvement of several global powers, the conflict shows no signs of abating, and the human cost continues to rise. More than 82,000 people have died in the fighting, and millions more are displaced, living in refugee camps or fleeing to neighboring countries in search of safety. Yet, despite the immense suffering, the international community seems unable or unwilling to intervene in a meaningful way. Myanmar has become a failed state, its future uncertain, its people trapped in a cycle of violence and desperation. The country is divided, not only geographically, but also ideologically. The central government, under the military junta, controls only a fraction of the country's territory, and its authority is increasingly questioned. In the east, rebel groups like the Karen and Karenni continue to fight for ethnic homelands. In the north, the Kachin Independence Army seeks full autonomy for the Kachin region, while the Arakan Army in the west pushes for an independent Rakhine nation. And in the heart of the country, the People's Defense Force (PDF) fights to overthrow the military government and replace it with a federal democracy. But despite these various factions, all with their own goals and motivations, one thing is certain: Myanmar is no longer a unified country. It is a battlefield, one where no side is winning, and where the future remains in limbo. This fractured state of affairs is compounded by the involvement of foreign powers. China, India, and Russia have all played roles in the conflict, each with its own agenda. China, as Myanmar's most significant foreign partner, has provided military support to the junta while simultaneously arming rebel factions in the country. This dual approach has allowed China to maintain influence over both sides of the conflict, but it has also created a volatile situation, one where Beijing risks losing control of its investments and interests in Myanmar. India, meanwhile, has focused on securing its northeastern border, where insurgent groups have operated with relative impunity. India has worked quietly with Myanmar's military, sharing intelligence and carrying out operations against separatist insurgents. But India's involvement has been limited, and its ties with Myanmar's ethnic militias remain weak. The United States, for its part, has avoided direct military intervention, instead opting to support Myanmar's exiled civilian government with non-lethal aid. Washington has also worked to increase its influence in the region, encouraging neighboring countries like Thailand to play a more active role in addressing the crisis. But despite these efforts, Myanmar's fate remains in the hands of the military junta, and the prospects for a peaceful resolution seem increasingly distant. The military junta, led by General Min Aung Hlaing, has shown little willingness to negotiate with the opposition. Despite mounting pressure from the international community, the junta continues to hold power with an iron grip, using brutal tactics to crush dissent. Armed groups have been targeted in airstrikes, villages have been burned to the ground, and entire populations have been forced into displacement. The junta's actions have only fueled the resistance, leading to an intensification of the conflict and further division within the country. The military's hold on power is not without its weaknesses, but it has proven resilient, and it is clear that the junta has no intention of stepping down voluntarily. Meanwhile, the ethnic militias, many of which have fought the government for decades, continue to resist. These groups, while united in their opposition to the military, are divided by their own ambitions for autonomy or independence. The Kachin, Karen, Rakhine, and Chin militias all have different visions for Myanmar's future, and while they share a common enemy in the military, they do not always agree on the solutions. The People's Defense Force (PDF), which was formed by Myanmar's exiled civilian government, has attempted to unite these various factions under a common cause. But this has proven to be a difficult task. The PDF, while growing in strength, has also become a target of rival ethnic groups, many of whom view it as a threat to their own independence. The international community's response to the crisis has been mixed. While countries like the United States, the European Union, and Japan have imposed sanctions on Myanmar's military leaders, these measures have had limited effect. The junta has shown little regard for international pressure, and the sanctions have done little to alter the course of the conflict. The United Nations has called for an immediate end to the violence and a return to civilian rule, but its efforts have been largely ineffective. Myanmar's neighbors, including Thailand, India, and China, have all played their parts in the crisis, but none have been willing to intervene in a way that would bring an end to the war. China, in particular, has played a critical role in shaping Myanmar's future. As Myanmar's most important foreign partner, China has invested heavily in the country's infrastructure, including energy projects, roads, and ports. These projects are vital to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to connect China to Africa, Europe, and the Middle East through a network of trade routes. Myanmar, with its access to the Indian Ocean, is a crucial part of this strategy, and China has worked tirelessly to maintain its influence in the country. But while China has supported the military junta, it has also quietly armed rebel factions, including the United Wa State Army UWSA and the Arakan Army, both of which have fought against the government. This dual strategy has allowed China to maintain a delicate balance, providing support to the junta while ensuring that its investments are protected from attacks by rebel forces. However, China's involvement in Myanmar is not without its complications. The country's ethnic militias, which have long resisted government rule, have increasingly turned their ire on China, accusing Beijing of backing the military's crackdown on ethnic populations. These groups, which are armed with Chinese-made weapons, have targeted Chinese assets in Myanmar, including pipelines, ports, and infrastructure projects. In some cases, Chinese nationals working in Myanmar have been caught in the crossfire. As the war continues, China finds itself in a precarious position supporting the junta while also navigating the growing resentment of Myanmar's ethnic groups. For India, Myanmar's conflict has become a matter of national security. Insurgent groups based in Myanmar have long posed a threat to India's northeastern states, where separatist movements have operated with relative impunity. India has worked closely with Myanmar's military to combat these insurgents, providing intelligence and sharing information about cross-border activities. India has also supported Myanmar's military government in its fight against ethnic militias, but its involvement has been largely limited to intelligence sharing and counterinsurgency operations. While India has taken steps to secure its northeastern border, it has been unwilling to openly challenge the junta or provide significant support to Myanmar's opposition groups. The United States, meanwhile, has taken a more cautious approach, providing non-lethal aid to Myanmar's exiled government and calling for international pressure on the junta. Washington has avoided direct military involvement, but it has supported efforts to hold the junta accountable for its actions. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on military leaders and businesses linked to the junta, but these measures have had little impact on the course of the conflict. The U.S. has also worked to strengthen its relationships with neighboring countries like Thailand, which has allowed Myanmar's opposition forces to operate from its territory. However, like India, the U.S. has been hesitant to escalate its involvement in Myanmar's war, wary of becoming too deeply entangled in the conflict. As Myanmar's war rages on, the country's future hangs in the balance. The conflict has become a regional and global issue, drawing in external powers and intensifying the violence. The human cost of the war is staggering, and the prospects for peace seem dim. Myanmar has become a failed state, a country torn apart by internal conflict and external influences. Its people suffer, trapped in a cycle of violence, displacement, and desperation. And as the war drags on, the world watches, powerless to stop the carnage.